Thanks so much. That's serious alphabet soup right there. When you start to combine VMLY&R with LVMH.
Oh, right. So we were meant to.
I was waiting for that to happen in my career. So thank you for that, Jennifer. Great to have you guys all here. And sometimes when you set somebody else up, you think to yourself, I hope this conversation goes well, and I hope we can find things that we both really care passionately about. And with you, Jennifer, I can just say I am so excited to be talking to you.
Champagne and handbags.
Period. And we just happen to have an audience with us, so please join me. I hope I don't forget about you when I get lost in this conversation with Jennifer Kasper. So Jennifer, as many of you have seen, she's the Senior Vice President of Media at LVMH Americas, LATAM, and North America. Joined during the pandemic, so we'll have to get a little bit into that story, what that's been like. Prior to that, Macy's for 15 years, so I'm super curious the differences between working in a more mass market brand like a Macy's. Although LVMH has, 70 Maisons in the Americas that you oversee in the Center of Excellence role of media. So within that, you also have brands like Sephora and Tiffany's and others. So a huge portfolio of different kinds of brands. And then before that, you were kind of a little bit in our agency world with Media Link and then with Meta, pre-Meta, Facebook. So an incredible career that brought you to this moment. So first of all, I want to hear from the audience, how many of you have bought what you would consider a luxury good in the last year? Raise your hands.
Yay, thank you.
Well, keep your hands raised, and if that was in the last 6 months, last 3 months. Last month? Okay, go ahead, be honest. Last week? And I'm going to ask, we're going to get to this later. We're not going to get into it now, but I'm going to ask also if any of that was through resale. So we'll get back to that in a moment. Sure. But I would love to hear a little bit about what is your actual role there? Like, what does media marketing mean at LVMH and as a center of excellence, not necessarily a P&L center within the business?
So LVMH is, believe it or not, though we are custodians of brands that are hundreds of years old, LVMH as a company is only about 35 years old because Bernard Arnault recognized the value of the brands that were, in many cases, family-owned, independently operated, and that there were opportunities as he started to build a portfolio of brands that operate autonomously. There were some functions that if we centralized them and aggregated our intelligence and our strength in the marketplace, that we could bring a lot of value across the group. And media has been one of those functions. That used to mean that we would go out into the marketplace and we would negotiate based on our checkbook. But as more and more of our investments have shifted into auctions, and you obviously can't negotiate with an auction, it's been much more about thought leadership, intelligence, and helping our maisons learn from each other and test intelligently into new ways of thinking about media. And for us, it really starts with brand. I mean, each of our individual maisons, there are 70 that, but really only about 30 are investing in paid media. But each of those 70-odd maisons have incredible brands that they're building on with a heritage and a vision for what that brand is about. And then the media ends up being a means to reach consumers with more precision.
Interesting. Are you enjoying it?
I am. I mean, listen, what could be bad? It's truly. I started in December of 2019. I thought we drank champagne every day. Apparently we don't. It was December. But it really has been in this portfolio. We range from Sephora and DFS in our selective retail business. We have, the heart of our business are fashion and leather goods with Vuitton, Dior, Fendi, Celine, a whole bunch of those brands. Also watches and jewelry, so Tag Heuer and Bulgari, and most recently Tiffany. And then wines and spirits.
Champagne.
And so we have great champagnes. We have Hennessy as kind of the foundation of our business here in the U.S. And what's been fascinating for me as a marketer and as someone who loves media is the range of circumstances that we're operating in. On one hand, you've got Sephora, who have arguably some of the best customer understanding and data in the market. On the full other end of the spectrum is Moet Hennessy, where you're talking not only about a CPG model, but a highly regulated CPG model where what they can do and how they can go to market is extremely different in terms of how well they know the consumer.
So before we get into the details and all that, I would love to stay elevated to the title of this, which is the state of luxury.
Sure.
from a marketing and media standpoint. So obviously we could see from a little bit of the show of hands, luxury is still doing really well. It did incredibly well, your brands especially, during the pandemic. It was actually a growth time period. And as we kind of enter this sort of concern of recessionary times, this economic pressure that people at all economic groups are, feeling a bit of, it's not necessarily affecting the purchasing power when it comes to luxury brands. So talk to us a little bit about what's going on there. How are you guys experiencing sort of the state of luxury today?
Well, what I can speculate is that the things that have always been the principles guiding luxury are things that are paying off now. Certainly there's a commitment to the quality and craftsmanship of the products that we make across the board. That's something we don't compromise on. There's the notion of the experience that we offer consumers, whether it's in our stores. I mean, we're in most cases largely verticalized, especially in our fashion and leather goods business. We're pulling things back toward the center so that we can really manage the experience and provide exceptional customer service and in all touch points. That also extends into the experiences we create, whether it's through fashion shows or big activations out in the community. We think a lot about the creative visionaries that are behind so many of our brands, and in a lot of cases, those are designers or artistic directors, or and who have a point of view where they're telling consumers what they want. They're not asking consumers what they want. That's what consumers expect of luxury, is to have a point of view, especially in fashion. And so, while there are a lot of signals out there from consumers, we have been in a position where we actually need to be ahead and in taking chances, and we've got a great track record of doing that with incredible talent. And then lastly, has been, and this is where our experience with supply chain issues that so many brands have experienced. We are, with all these other factors, comfortable with the idea of scarcity. The idea that we will run out is actually by design in some ways, because we have to be on to the next. We can't sit back and only rely on bestsellers to drive our business. So when you think about all those things, especially around scarcity, at a time where we have preserved quality, we have brands that are hundreds of years old, and we have a vision where consumers, I think, especially in fashion, are looking for something to break through what has become, I think, a pretty monotonous fashion cycle. We were positioned well, and then you put on top of it a pandemic where, our core consumer are people who have some disposable income to start with. They're, in many cases, people who were making luxury purchases, reserved a lot of money they would have otherwise been spending on travel, on concert tickets, on, other experiences. They had some money. Their portfolios, if they were invested in the stock market, their portfolios may have done very well. And they, during the pandemic and the shutdown, many of them decided to treat themselves to investments in what felt like brands that were going to hold their value. And so our business during the pandemic took off, and because we delivered on all the other attributes, especially in experience and helping people feel special and seen and valued as consumers during that time, our business has continued to hold and be very steady.
So I'll kind of insert the tangent question right now on resale. First of all, if you're willing to admit it, how many of you have bought luxury through resale or even rental? So how are you all, if you can talk about it a little bit, like how are you thinking about the resale market now? And you just talked about scarcity, so clearly there is going to be massive resale value associated with the fact that if you can't find a product, you're going to go to other places and go after sometimes those collabs or those really interesting brand.
I mean, listen, it's absolutely part of the landscape, and we don't have a position right now in doing it ourselves, but where we know that our obligation is to create brands and products that hold their value, and that consumers who decide to invest in them, whether it's for retaining them for the rest of their lives or handing them on to a new generation or reselling them, that we need to focus our energy on creating the products that we start with and holding the value there. I will say, the one thing we are more curious about is authenticity, and that a lot of what's going on in the resale market involves counterfeits, and counterfeits are something that we think about quite a bit. And so, we've made some investments and are exploring blockchain as a way to guarantee authenticity, because I think that's that's the underbelly of the resale market, I think, is in counterfeits. And so we're trying to think through, and this has less to do with media, more to do kind of with the digital and technology and some things that are adjacent to what my team and I work on. But really making sure that when our brand is out into the market, that we're protecting it that way too.
And it's interesting because it all does come back to media marketing.
Yeah.
Those are all channels and places where the consumer's having an experience with your brands. So I'd love to talk about that a little bit, the portfolio of your brands and how you sort of manage that across sort of higher end luxury all the way through to what you consider to be CPG and or like Sephora, retail, and with your Macy's background. So if you could tell your Macy's self what you now know about, luxury codes and luxury principles and the things that you're picking up from a pure marketing and media standpoint, working in the space that you're in now. And also for our audience, it really is made up of a CPG, I think, in a lot of respects, professionals. Are there things that we learn through luxury that are transferable?
Listen, we are in a privileged position. Part of it has to do with how we are owned, that we can be more patient, and that we are not always obligated to set our KPI on a short-term return through a conversion. We are building relationships with consumers, some of which are multi-generational relationships, and we know that there is a patience required for that to pay off, and that we are measuring our success a little bit differently than I had the ability to think about when I was helping drive one-day sales at Macy's. It was a different business. So to think about the longer game and to have the gauge of success not always being about conversion, but also really thinking about brand equity and brand desirability. And we spend, in measurement conversations and thinking about how it is we gauge success, we spend as much, if not more time talking about how our brands are performing in terms of desirability. Do we look at performance? 100%, absolutely, but it's not the only gauge of success, and we are constantly reminded to think about that tension between investments we're making in branding and experience and consumer activations that may or may not have an immediate payoff.
So I don't know if anybody else in the audience got to see the Virgil Abloh exhibit this summer, the big exhibition that he had, I think one of his last big things for LVMH. And I just came back from LA where I got to see the LVMH 200 trunk exhibit, which was basically celebrating the 200th anniversary through just a cross-section of artists and people who were close to the house and had relationships with the brand. It was their version and interpretation of a trunk. So it wasn't just trunks, it really ran the gamut, but it was such an incredible experience. And I kept thinking as I was going through that, thinking of then getting to talk to you, what is the relationship between executions like that and that kind of experiential moment, even from a media and marketing standpoint? Are you all thinking about that in terms of, I know you said it's not about conversion, but like a brand equity KPI and how it all aligns to the bigger feeling a consumer gets for the brand?
Yeah, all the time. I mean, I think every one of our maisons are participating, thinking about what their interpretation of that kind of thing is. Certainly in Vuitton having, whether it has been some various anniversaries or celebrations to build around, or Virgil Abloh's vision for Vuitton menswear and his collaborations with Air Force One and those sorts of things. We've done incredible immersive things with Dior when Lady Dior as a fragrance kind of had another wave of attention in the public eye. There was an incredible pop-up shop down in Soho that was surrounded by flowers because it's a brand that's so much about a floral experience. Tiffany has been doing an enormous amount of work around its high jewelry collection, and they just had an exhibition in London with the Saatchi Gallery where they were building it around kind of their heritage of high jewelry. And those sorts of things where it's about experiencing a brand and being part of a brand in a way that isn't always about commerce, but is about creating desirability. It's interesting too, in listening to a number of other speakers talk about media and media being increasingly digital, we're thinking in media more about, what the meaning is of the real world. And it's not to say that the experiences we're creating in the digital world aren't incredibly important, but we have not given up on the real world as a place to have experiences that are ultimately more human, and where our business and our products are very high touch in a lot of ways, and where, to ask someone to spend $5,000 on a handbag, it doesn't mean they won't convert online. They will. But the odds are incredibly high that there's something tangible that they've had as an experience where they've touched the product or seen the product or met someone who's an ambassador of that product in some way that has added to their experience in real life.
So I'd love to get a little tactical with you in terms of the role that you play with media. When you're talking about the brands, you've now set up kind of this really incredible kind of 360 view for us of what it means to champion and sort of be a steward of these brands. In the media space, though, that kind of does turn up a notch. Like, you must have some nervous moments sometimes because you kind of put the brand out there from a brand safety standpoint, from, again, an equity, and really like you kind of put it out there for consumers and for influencers and creators and others to a little bit do what they want with it. So talk to us a little bit about your actual role and how you think about and plan for those things.
So my team and I have used the analogy of being kind of the Jiminy Crickets for our maisons. Each of them are very focused on their individual business. They each have a very clear business strategy globally and locally here in the US especially. Huge driver of our business in so many different maisons. And my team and I are a resource internally when they need to come and think about things as they're taking some of these risks or making some of these investments, or deciding not to kind of counsel them through what we're seeing in the industry. So they are so singly minded on their individual business and category and their competition, and we have the privilege of kind of seeing a broader horizon and also seeing how some of the other businesses have done things. I mean, the reality is many of our maisons are competing with each other, so they are not entirely forthcoming or even in conversation with one another, but we get to serve as kind of a hub of intelligence of what we see happening, and then also to go out into the media marketplace and negotiate the kinds of first-to-market opportunities that our maisons are looking for. And because we're coming in as LVMH and not just as a single maison, we have considerably more leverage in the market.
And how are you thinking about your own channels from a media perspective?
In terms of the sites and mobile experiences
Sites and the flagships that you've talked about,
Yeah.
even physical spaces as well.
they're an extension of the brand, and they are. And I mean, the other thing I haven't really touched on is the importance of the headquarters mentality and being at the center of these brands. So many of them are headquartered in Europe, and are the decisions around what the site experience is or what a store experience will be is part of the ethos of that brand, which in many cases is French or Italian, and figuring out how to bridge that gap between what a consumer in this moment in time living in Paris and how he or she is shopping, and how sometimes that's different than it is in the US, and trying to figure out how we advocate for what's happening in terms of especially in terms of e-commerce behaviors that are a bit different in the US than we are seeing in Europe. And then, on the other end of the spectrum are our colleagues in China who are helping us understand what may be to come, because they're seeing things sometimes years before we are in terms of adoptions and behavior changes.
Yeah, we follow that a lot. It's incredible. And you have to kind of place your bets a little bit to see if a Chinese consumer behavior is really something that would ever truly, emerge and get, exported into North America. I would love to understand a little bit the contrast between what you see in your role across the Americas. So from a North America versus LATAM standpoint, are there big differences in consumer behavior and even shopping behavior, or is it largely the same, just different languages and different cultures?
So this is my first foray into working with Latin America in a significant way. And the thing that I've come to appreciate is that the value of our brands transcends borders. And generally, if there's awareness and there's some level of access to the brands, there's generally desire. What I have found to be a more limiting factor in terms of how we grow the business is the volatility in different countries. So one of the areas that I've been spending more time learning about is Argentina. And just the currency fluctuations alone, let alone the political situations in some other parts of the world, are a big driver. The macroeconomic factors and things that don't have anything to do with luxury, but do have to do with the stability and the wealth of the individuals who are inclined to buy our products is a big thing. And even in buying media, when the currency is fluctuating like crazy, and what it means to negotiate rates or think about what a long-term commitment means to a partner in such a volatile market has been really fascinating. That has less to do with our exact business. It's figuring out how we take what is precious and special about our business that needs to remain stable, but do business in a market like Brazil or Argentina. Mexico has been an area of big growth for us too, and trying to think about, even in not painting all of Latin America with one color, it's so diverse in terms of what we're able to do in market.
And if we take that culture into, understanding what consumers need out of their lives differently, and really look at the kind of the cultural beat of like society and what's driving trends today, and then you add to that kind of purposeful and more positive sustainability awareness and concern that consumers have. How are you marrying all those things, and how do you look to those trends to inform what you all are doing from a business standpoint?
Yeah, I think in terms of sustainability, there are two big components of this. One for us is the fact that we are making high quality goods that will stand the test of time. And I think there is something that comes with that idea of quality, where if someone chooses to own something and take care of it, that it's a purchase that will last as opposed to it being disposable. It's not to say there isn't a fashion trend and whatnot, but a lot of what we sell are classic silhouettes that will, and the quality is there, and we stand by that. I think the other piece is that we have had a few beauty brands, Fresh is the one that comes immediately to my mind, that is ahead in the space of thinking about clean beauty, sustainable ingredients, that sort of thing, and trying to figure out how it is that we participate in a moment where the idea of clean beauty feels very buzzy and of a moment, and yet how is it that we pull out some pieces of a brand's heritage that have been there all along, and maybe they were ahead of their time. How do they not miss a moment, but how do they also not feel like they're chasing something that isn't, part of what the brand is?
It's a really good answer, because we talk to other brands and they don't always have such a good answer. So that was really helpful, I think, for all of us in how we think about, those really important topics, because it's so easy sometimes to lose your authenticity as you try to do something or say something that is going to be important to the consumer. In the last couple minutes, I'd love to just hear a little personal from you in terms of like your own career trajectory. It's super impressive, and we're all here kind of in different stages and phases of our own career journey. So I'd love to hear, has it been totally intentional? There's a great thread now that's running through your career, both from a media standpoint, but also across retail. How should others be thinking about, navigating the career from the Jennifer Kasper?
Oh, God. So my first job out of college was at the Brooklyn Museum teaching fourth graders about Egyptian art. So the fact that I'm doing this now is, I think, just an indication of being open to new opportunities. At the time that I started in marketing at Macy's, social media didn't exist. We were a assemblage of regional department stores. We didn't exist as a national brand as Macy's. And so I think it's been a combination in my career of being open to where the world is going, but also being clear about what my contribution could be to that. And whether as a marketer or a retailer or someone who loves brands or became very interested in media and technology and data and all those things and how they glued together. And then just being open to what might be next. When I had an incredible career at Macy's and loved being part of that organization, but also was curious to learn about what more was happening in the world. So I took a bit of a detour into more of a media role, and among many learnings, have such deep appreciation for people who sell media, who make it look so much easier than it is. It's so much more complicated and dynamic as a marketplace. And had a great couple of years at Facebook where I learned an incredible amount, but yearned to be back in a brand role. And so this opportunity to LVMH was a great hybrid between working with brands and being a bit of a consultant and an authority on what was going on in the media landscape.
Oh, I knew it was going to be fun talking to you. So I'm sure I've just whet everyone else's appetite. Definitely follow Jennifer on LinkedIn. Try to grab her at a break, but it was great talking to you. We'll be watching your career, and congratulations on all the success.
Thanks.